Hi, and welcome to our webcast for January 12, 2018. My name is Christian Debré, and this is Amy Asbrook, the director of Toro Vivant at Dediet, also joining us sometime, but not today.
Not today.
Taylor Hayat, who was sick a few days ago, and she is just recovering. We wish her well.
Yeah.
And for the New Year's, we wish everybody
Happy
a
New
Happy
Year.
New Year. Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet, is a non-religious organization by and for people with disabilities and our allies. Our goal is to inform, unify, and give voice to the disability rights opposition to assisted suicide, euthanasia, and other ending of life practices that discriminates against people with disabilities. Today's topics, we have only one, but a good one. Draft regulations for Canada's euthanasia and assisted suicide law. So Amy Asbrook will talk about it in a few seconds.
I sure will. I'll talk a lot about it.
Oh, yeah.
Happy New Year, everyone. The day after our last webcast, on December 16th, Health Canada issued draft regulations for monitoring the assisted suicide and euthanasia program. Now, the program's been in operation for a year and a half, and they finally issued the draft regulations.
So no data or close to no data. Two reports who are incomplete or very difficult to analyze was issued, but with no standardizing thing.
Right, exactly. And we had written them a letter last March saying, here's the stuff we think you need to cover and the information you need to gather.
We doesn't even know if somebody has read it.
We have no idea. We're using the term assisted suicide and euthanasia instead of the program's official name, medical assistance in dying, because of our policy to avoid softening the language around medical killing.
Because it's still killing.
Right, exactly. And, you know, it's really sort of a effort by the people who promote assisted suicide and euthanasia to change the language that's used in order to change the definition so that assisted suicide isn't actually suicide. That's what they want to do. And we don't want to go along with that. Okay, so we've looked at the proposed regulations carefully and have a lot of comments to make. So Canada Health said the primary purpose of the monitoring program was to, quote, provide transparency and foster public trust, unquote. Among the program's objectives were, quote, support the protection of vulnerable individuals, unquote, and, quote, help determine whether the legislation is meeting its objectives.
So it's very good. They try to do a measurement purpose thing, and a protection for people, and a kind of everything making clear. That's basically what they have said, that this is their world, okay?
Right, exactly.
That's what they declare in the beginning.
Right. But for several reasons, we don't believe that the proposed regulations will meet their goals.
You will see why.
Yeah, there are a lot of reasons. First of all, the regulations were prepared following a secret pre-regulatory process where unnamed individuals and organizations were consulted in developing the first draft of the regulations. We are not aware of any consumer or disability rights groups that were invited to participate. And this lack of input shows in the proposed regulations. Health Canada did not provide minutes to these meetings or a list of who participated. So much for transparency.
Yeah, and be aware, okay, we are there as the Toro Vivant Not Dead Yet. We are a part of CDC, and there is two other groups who are very important in the opposition, which is EPC and the group of doctors Living with Dignity, who are the expert and the group who oppose the most.
Right, and
no of those four organizations have received any communication to just get their input.
Right.
So
they act as though because we have opposed that, we have nothing to say about the laws themselves. So that's why we wrote the letter. But the fact is that we should have been at that table, and we weren't.
And the shock of the idea you bring the light was not their way to work.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. The proposed regulations do not collect enough information to tell us, first, what are the characteristics of individuals who request assisted suicide and euthanasia, the circumstances in which requests arise, and whether individuals are seeking assisted dying due to certain socio-demographic conditions as opposed to suffering emanating from their medical conditions and the dying process. That's a quote. That's one of their goals, but they're not gathering enough information to get the information, to get that. They're not gathering enough data to get that information. So how can they think to make reports that answer those questions without gathering the information?
There's no real way yet. Let me just a second.
Yeah. Okay. Also, it doesn't tell us whether the safeguards are effective in preventing ineligible people from being euthanized and protecting vulnerable people from being induced to commit suicide at a time of weakness. So, qu'est-ce que tu fais?
J'arrange l'éclairage parce que l'image est vraiment très mauvaise.
Oh, okay. Okay. So, the idea is to, protect vulnerable people from incitement to commit suicide, but the information that they're gathering and the processes that they're proposing won't provide enough information to achieve that goal, and that's a problem. The regulations don't include any way to verify that doctors are actually filing their reports. And that's been a problem both in Quebec and elsewhere.
Yeah, just try to ask to a doctor to file something, some paper. Right. You will see what happens.
Right. As we've seen in Quebec and the European countries, non-reporting of medical killing by doctors is a major problem that leads to distorted picture of how many people are dying by euthanasia and assisted suicide.
And it happened, and we have proof.
Right. So what we hear from Europe is that, oh, everything's fine, and what they do is study all the doctors' reports. They don't study the
reports who are missing or incomplete.
Right. Because they can't. So what some studies have done is to actually look at the number of people who have died, figure out how they died, and realize that a lot of them have died from medical killing that wasn't documented as assisted suicide or euthanasia, and it wasn't consensual.
And it's not a very small number. It's a very large number.
Right.
Okay. In Belgium, it's like a third or something.
Yeah, it's something like that.
Okay, which is not more than detectable. There is proof. You just have to look at the report of the government itself.
Right.
And there are a lot of.
Well, no, it's not the government that's putting out those reports.
No, the reports do, but the numbers are government numbers. Okay, because they issue the report about the death of people, and they issue about the
yeah,
report.
no, it's particular studies that have done this process of backtracking from the total number of deaths to figure out that there are a lot of medical deaths that haven't been reported as assisted suicides or euthanasias.
Yeah, but there is proof, and it's easy to see.
Right, exactly. The regulations put the responsibility for enforcing the law back on local law enforcement agencies, but without a clear system for informing them of violations, nor do the regulations guarantee that local authorities will have the means and incentive to prosecute violations.
Did you have heard of any police court who will hire a specialist, or like they do for different kind of crime?
Right.
Did they receive some budget for it?
They haven't hired anybody to investigate these particular kind of crimes. there have been cases in Quebec where people have
we
been...
have three
Right.
case, which is obvious that something smell bad, let's say, at least, okay?
People were killed who were not eligible, but nobody's done anything.
No inquiry, no nothing. It's like nothing happened.
Right, exactly. As is the case in Oregon and Washington, the regulations don't track what happens to assisted suicide prescriptions for lethal drugs once they are written. There is nothing to prevent a third party from stepping in to administer the lethal dose to the person against their will. Nor, not tracking the drugs means that they could be left around the house subject to theft and resale, or being accidentally taken by children. And nor is the information about complications of self-administering drugs like choking or vomiting or waking from a coma collected.
And like the Murphy's Law said, if you could think about it, it will happen.
If something can go wrong, it will.
Yes.
Yes. And, you know, one of the things they talk about is assisted suicide is so peaceful and painless and yada, yada, yada.
Which is not completely true.
Right. It's not completely true. And there haven't been any studies on complications.
And complications happen.
Right. Complications happen more in assisted suicide than in euthanasia. But this stuff needs to be studied. And if you don't gather information about it, how could it be studied?
So far for study.
Right. The regulations say that doctors can file reports either with a provincial authority or via a federal online questionnaire, which is still to be developed.
Oh, developing of something from computer, from
right.
the central government of Canada.
Yeah.
Just remember the paying system.
Right.
It goes very well.
Yeah, yeah. But the regulations don't explain what happens if the report provided by the doctor or the provincial authority is incomplete. And that happens in, I think they said 40-something% of cases in Quebec that they needed more information.
Yeah, that doesn't mean that the doctor do something wrong.
Right.
It means that it needs some information.
Right.
And they don't give it.
They don't explain how that information is to be gotten. What's the procedure? What is the process for getting more information or clarifying answers that are unclear? What happens when, as sometimes is the case in Quebec, a request for more information is questioned, or doctors simply refuse to provide the information asked for?
It happened.
They aren't using the experience we already have to solve the problems that are going to come up. And they could be doing that, but they didn't. They didn't. The regulations will not be effective in monitoring the program should eligibility be expanded to include minors, people whose suffering is purely psychological, or those using advanced directives in case of dementia. Obviously, the regulations would have to be updated, but this should be stated clearly. And again, it's like they're acting as if this is the only time. They're not anticipating the potential problems. So they should have said, if the law changes because of this study that's being done now, then we'll have to change the regulations. They could have said that, but no, they didn't.
No, they just followed it.
Yeah.
It will not happen. Don't look at it.
Right.
It will just disappear.
Right. There is still no effective safeguard in the law or regulations to prevent a third party from making a request on behalf of a person who has a communication disability or who is under the influence of a third party. This is a loophole in the law which could have been closed by the regulations.
Easily closed.
Right. So we offer a couple suggestions how they could have closed the loophole. And the idea is, this was a problem. This is a problem. We all agree that we don't want vulnerable people to be incited to commit suicide in a time of weakness. So why don't we just close the loophole?
Yeah, and it came from the rules the Supreme Court have done.
Yeah.
Okay, they should protect the people who are vulnerable. The government says it, we will, and they don't do it.
Right, exactly. Okay, one way to do it would be by requiring practitioners to meet one-on-one with the person making the request without any family or others in attendance.
Yeah, because sometimes the family is the problem.
Right, exactly. To verify that there is no coercion. So, and we'll talk in a few seconds about communication access, because oftentimes somebody with a communication disability, the only person that can interpret for them is a member of the family. So you need to have communication access. But meeting with the person separate from their family, that's the only way you're really going to know if the person is speaking for themselves or if they're being influenced. Another way would be by making the requirement for communication accommodations more specific and applying it earlier in the eligibility determination process to ensure effective and unbiased communications. So where they talk about that in the regulations is like the last step before administering euthanasia. And that should be the first thing that happens to make sure.
It's obvious, because if you start with a false thing, and at the last end, you say, "Are you sure?"
Right.
Sometimes it's very too late.
Right.
But if at the beginning there is a verification, something to look at, and oops, no, something goes wrong, you stop the process at the beginning.
Right. You have to make sure that the person has an effective means of communication, so that it works for the person both to be able to express herself and to understand what's being said. And it needs to be impartial, so not done by a family member.
And it's not slow down the process. Sometimes it could go even faster, because the
technology
and the way it's done, it's clearer, so it may be faster. If the people, it's exactly what they want, okay, that's their will.
Right. If the person hasn't been using a communication board and gets an opportunity to use one, that could be a huge advantage to them.
So
yeah.
Why?
Yeah. Okay, so the regulations do not attempt to track the participation of assisted suicide advocates in the request for eligibility determination process. And this is important in order to, A, avoid the potential for the advocacy group to persuade the person that assisted suicide and euthanasia is the best choice, even if the person is ambivalent. Okay. So people who promote assisted suicide choices, compassion and choices, dying with dignity, all those groups, they want, they come into the person and somebody calls them and says, I want assisted suicide, but I don't know what to do. They, do all the, fill out, give you the forms and help you fill it out and help you find a doctor and help do everything. But it doesn't really take into account the possibility that the person might not be absolutely sure they want to die. And they move you through the process, but they don't think about solving your problems. They just get you to euthanasia.
Yeah. And sometimes they're pushing very hard.
Right, exactly. So also, it doesn't track how much money these advocacy groups may be making for their services through donations.
Oh, there is money. Oh.
Yeah. So, you people were so helpful in getting my husband to die the way he wanted to. Here, we'll give you this big amount of donations, and it should be tracked how much money these people are making out of that kind of situation.
If they need this money, if the person who wants to commit suicide change their mind, maybe they will do something so the changing of mind will not happen.
Right, exactly. We need to know that kind of thing.
There is case in USA, so we are not better than US people.
Right. And finally, we need to prevent the advocacy organization's participation from having an effect on the process. Advocates may be asked to act as witnesses to the signing of the application. And practitioners may also begin to offload certain tasks, such as informing the person about something, like the doctor has to inform the person that there is palliative care available, and that they can withdraw their request. And if the doctor says, well, this volunteer from this organization can just tell you all this stuff that's on this form here. If the doctor offloads those tasks onto a volunteer from Compassion and Choices or Dying with Dignity, that's not right.
Nope, that's not right at all.
Right. And also sometimes they might do documentation as well. Okay, so demographic information that's collected is insufficient to determine the role of economic factors in a decision to request assisted suicide and euthanasia. Household composition and income are not currently gathered. You need to know about home ownership or lack thereof. So is the person a homeowner, a renter? Are they homeless? We don't know. That information isn't gathered.
It's important.
The date of the onset of the disability or illness and the disability-related expenses are all factors that could affect the person's economic situation and therefore their decision to ask for assisted suicide.
All those things could affect the decision.
Right. Okay. It appears that during this closed pre-regulatory process, Health Canada bowed to pressure to push back deadlines for doctors' reports. Also, they have broadcast their intention not to, this is Health Canada, has broadcast their intention not to enforce the timelines by stating that events don't occur within particular timeframes. In other words, the regulations seem to allow that if the request does not result in euthanasia, the obligation to report will disappear after 90 days. That's our reading. We may be wrong. We may be not reading it correctly, but
read the
sure
text
looks
yourself.
like that.
Read the text yourself, but the way we are reading it, that's the way it's gone.
Yeah.
So those data just disappear, and almost nobody could catch those data to get it together.
Right.
So how the government will know what happened?
And again, in order to understand the program, we need to gather information not just on people who are euthanized, but
everybody
people who make requests or withdraw them. We need to know why they withdraw the requests. We need to know all that stuff.
Yeah, because if a lot of people money
if they receive palliative care
and they doesn't know that it was available for them, not the same thing.
Right, exactly. Okay, the proposal to allow for multiple systems for collecting data, federal or provincial recipients, so people who get those doctors' reports, could create confusion and a lack of uniformity. Also, if provinces are submitting reports with data that's already clumped together, will it be possible to find enough information about individual cases to tell if there is a violation or to do anything about it?
Yeah.
So, the system they're talking about is where, okay, if it's a euthanasia, you report to this person, or if it's an assisted suicide, you report to this person. If the person withdraws their request, you report to this other person. It could get really mixed up that way.
Yeah.
And they're saying that the alternative is to use this nice online form that they're going to make, which is going to reduce everybody to a bunch of check boxes, which doesn't give you very much information about their unique circumstances. So, and if the provinces then turn around and report this clumped information, here's all the information we have in this big clump, and you see, oh, wait, there's some people who weren't eligible who were euthanized. How do we find out the doctor that did that? And how do we find out more information? Well, no, the data's already clumped together, so we can't tell you. you know, that's not going to work. It's not going to work out.
For us, it's obvious. It's logical. Why other people seem to look at it and say that's the way we want to do.
Right. There's no requirement to document the process of death by euthanasia. We talked about assisted suicide, and the same is true for death by euthanasia. For example, the time between the injections, like there are multiple drugs that are injected, so how long between those drugs, those injections? What's the time for the onset of coma? What's the time between the administration of the drugs and death? There's no documenting of complications and what measures are taken to resolve them. So if
there is no.
So if the person has an allergic reaction to the medications and starts to vomit,
it happened.
You know, there's no way to know because there's no recording of what happens after.
So if you don't know a problem, you could not solve it.
Right, exactly.
But the problem is still there.
Right, exactly. And in fact, the whole issue of complications is very understudied. There are only a couple of studies out there that talk about complications at all. And they show that there are more complications with assisted suicide than with euthanasia, but still that there's a certain percentage of complications. And if
like any medical procedure.
Right. And if they're trying to say that this is everybody's happy and it's nice and the person just goes to sleep.
And dead.
Right. And, there's no problem. That's not accurate. It's not accurate. And they need to study why that doesn't happen.
And the doctors are still not obligated to file a report. And even if there was obligated, if there is no to the law or regulation, nothing happened.
Right. And in Quebec, they have a system for cross-checking. They also have the institutions file reports on the number of euthanasias that happen in the institutions. And in Quebec, it's only euthanasia. So that's one way that they can cross-check to see if the doctors have filed their reports. But these regulations don't provide anything like that. So there's no way to cross-check whether the doctors have filed the reports. And if the doctor...
even in Quebec, they have found some discrepancy,
right,
and they do nothing with it.
Right, exactly. Okay, where the person making the request is determined ineligible, demographic data isn't collected. So I guess we don't need to know about the people who are determined ineligible, which doesn't make any sense at all. We need to know about the whole program, not just
because it's for everybody.
Right, exactly.
It's clear, it's for everybody.
Information about the application of safeguards is also not required for all of those people.
Oops.
Some of these steps should be verified before the eligibility determination process proceeds. So here are some of the safeguards that should be recorded and verified in the doctor's report. To ensure that the request was made in writing and duly signed, dated, and witnessed. That should be verified.
That's a minimum.
That's a safeguard. To ensure that the person was informed that they have a grievous and irremediable medical condition. That's also an important safeguard that should be verified. To inform the person that they may withdraw the request at any time. That's an important thing to
very important to
inform the person, and that should be recorded that they received that information.
I'll start the process. I'll change my mind.
Right.
Do you have the right to change my mind?
Right, exactly.
A lot of people will do that.
Right. And also to take all necessary measures to ensure effective communication. Again, it was at the very end of the regulations before euthanasia, and that should be right up front. Okay, all safeguards should be verified where the person becomes ineligible during the assessment process. So if somebody makes a request and then they lose the capacity to consent, all of the safeguards should nonetheless be recorded. You know, again, it's important to have all the information, not just, oh, well, they're no longer eligible, so we won't record the information about this person. The proposed demographic information to be collected includes place of residence, but it only offers the option of, you know, long-term institution or private residence. It doesn't say whether the person's homeless or whether they've been hospitalized for a long time. It includes the postal code, which, depending on the situation, could identify the person almost individually.
In Canada, it's obvious. Just at our home, okay, our postal code is easy. J6T2V2.
Right.
Three people.
Right.
Okay, so if one die, it's easy to find which one. So they're so far for the privacy,
right.
And they fight for the privacy. They
right.
doesn't want to collect some data for the privacy, and
right.
so at the right time they say, okay, we need the postal code.
Right.
Hey,
the information needed is about the hospitals that are available, the services that are available, the kind of environment, and that all can be gathered just by the first 3 digits of the postal code.
The 3 or 4 first digits, it's enough.
Yeah. So, okay. Let's see. And the other piece of demographic information that they gather is the occupation during the work life. Other demographic information that we thought they should be collected so as to, you know, verify things, whether there's a race impact, people are being segregated by race, whether there's an impact based on religion, ethnic background.
It's happened, all those 3. It's obvious. Okay?
Yeah. Yep.
Just look the news.
Right. A lot of people of color receive less aggressive, life-saving treatments than white people. And we need to know if that comes around to the assisted suicide and euthanasia problem as well.
And be sure it will happen.
Mm-hmm. We need to know about household composition. Who's living there? Is it, you know, people being cared for by their children? Is it just a husband and wife? Is it gay partners? You know, we need to know who's in the household. We need to know the income range, and if the person is a homeowner or a renter or homeless. We need to know the language spoken, whether the person is receiving services in their first language. That's very important, especially in parts of the country. Well, first of all, where patients aren't necessarily getting services in their first language, and also where French-speaking people aren't getting services in their first language.
In a lot of provinces.
Yeah, exactly.
In Quebec, there's no problem. English people will receive the service in their language. It's easy.
Yeah.
It's the law in Quebec.
Yeah.
But in the other province, it's not sure.
Right. We need to know whether the medical condition is lifelong, as in, you know, onset in childhood or at birth.
Or very, very long.
Right.
I'm sick since 15 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so
whether it's onset in adulthood or whether it's recent. So, because if it's recent, somebody may still be in the grieving process, and that's an impediment to their capacity to make the decision.
Just think that you lose your leg just 6 months ago. You may still to recover. Grieving. So you could take a bad decision.
Right. We need to know about who is the primary healthcare provider, because if it's not the same as the doctor who approved euthanasia, then we know that there's been doctor shopping going on.
That's a way to catch shopping.
How many hours of personal care are required per day? That's an important thing to know, because if the person has needs for personal care that aren't being met, then they may be asking for euthanasia because of that problem.
Yeah, they are suffering for bad treatment, not because they just want to die.
Right. And if their personal care attendant needs are being met, who is meeting those needs? Does the person report problems in their living situation? That's an important thing to know. Is there supplemental health insurance? Is the person getting all of their health needs paid for, or are they having to pay out of pocket? What are the expenses related to illness and disability that the person is paying for? All of those things, that information needs to be gathered to know if people are being induced to have euthanasia in a time of weakness.
To be safe in this law.
Right. Right. Okay, so to read the draft regulations, we have the website listed on our text, and you can find our text on our Facebook page.
So you have all the information to verify what we have said.
Right. And to find the regulations, do a Google search on Health Canada Regulations MAID, and you can follow the links. The first link should come up as the one for the regulations. The comments are due on February 13th, and we encourage you to submit your own comments. And we will post our draft comments on the website as soon as we have finished the French translation. So that will be coming up soon. So if you have any questions or comments about what we talk about here, you can visit our webpage, our Facebook page at facebook.com/toujourvivant, not dead yet. You can visit our website at tvndy.ca. You can email us at info@tv-ndy.ca, or you can follow us on Twitter @TVNDY. Thanks to Christian for helping out.
Thank you, Amy.
And thanks to you all for being there.
Happy New Year to everybody.
Happy New Year. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.